A nation changed and challenged. From New York's Ground Zero to the Pentagon, to a field in Pennsylvania, across America, and around the world. A day to remember September 11th then and now. Where does the nation go from here?
America remembers. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. In New York, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon, this was a day that was at once emotionally exhausting, but also uplifting. A day in which the nation was drawn to the sites of the terrorist attacks 1 year ago by a common need to remember, grieve, and reflect on where we go from here. This evening, President and Mrs. Bush were at Ground Zero, New York, walking down the ramp into what many consider to be sacred ground, the vast pit where the World Trade Centers once stood, talking to family members one by one. To everyone's relief, there have been no international terrorist incidents, but the elevated state of readiness remains in place, Code Orange, activated when administration intelligence officials learned that there could be other attacks on the anniversary, primarily against U.S. interests overseas. Now, here's NBC's Roger O'Neill from Ground Zero on the first anniversary of 9/11 and how it moved a nation. Roger?
Tom, good evening. Today, they came to memorialize, to honor, and for the first time for the relatives, a chance to touch Ground Zero. All left a rose. Some took home a handful of sacred ground. The bagpipers' haunting sound, Amazing Grace. From New York's 5 boroughs, converging on Ground Zero. It was a peaceful September morning today, but at 8:46, the same minute the first jet hit the World Trade Center a year ago, just as the first moment of silence began, suddenly the wind started blowing, and there was turbulence again at Ground Zero. As they did a year ago, relatives clutched pictures of loved ones. Today, not in search of, but in honor of. United in time's history, Americans at 3 memorials stood silent today when time a year ago stood still. 8:46 a.m., 9:03 a.m., New York, 2,801 dead. 9:38 a.m., Washington, 184 dead. 10:06 a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania, 40 dead.
Vincent, a body.
In New York for 2 hours and 29 minutes from the first A,
Joseph Angelini, Sr.
David Lawrence Angel.
to the last Z,
Igor Zuckelman.
the names of those lost here echoed through the gaping crater of the World Trade Center. As loved ones walked down the ramp to where the Twin Towers stood, what stood out was their diversity, a mirror of America's diversity, today, together.
They were our neighbors, our husbands, our children, our sisters, our brothers, and our wives. They were our countrymen and our friends. They were us.
At the Pentagon and in Pennsylvania, I pledge allegiance
United States of America.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all, which President Bush promised today as he visited all 3 sites.
The murder of innocents cannot be explained, only endured. And though they died in tragedy, they did not die in vain.
Jane C. Folger.
Often overshadowed by New York and Washington, today as 40 doves were released over the Pennsylvania countryside honoring the passengers of Flight 93, it was Muriel Borza, 11, whose sister died here, whose simple eloquence made all pause.
I have a wish that can fulfill in memory of those who perished on September 11th. I ask for 1 minute of peace worldwide today, September 11th, 2002.
Peace is what many relatives were looking for today at Ground Zero. What began as an empty circle of honor became a ring of roses, a centerpiece of remembrance, and a place to save forever what was forever lost 1 year ago.
Often forgotten as America tries to remember the thousands of people who were in these buildings who got out alive. For them, for all of the relatives, today was an awful anniversary. But they got through today, and tomorrow will be tomorrow. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Roger O'Neill tonight. Today's ceremonies were not confined just to the attack sites. This was not just about New York or Washington or rural Pennsylvania. NBC's Bob Faw tonight in Utah on the national need to be a part of this day. Robert?
Tom, Main Street America was changed by 9/11, and even though in small towns like this one, Salina, they have moved on.
What's going on today? Well, the country remains on high alert. That's condition orange. It's the second highest level of terror alert. And as you might expect, nerves have been on edge all day with a series of false alarms involving airlines, police, and the FBI. Joining me now from Washington, NBC's Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams. Pete?
A day of jitters, Tom. Federal agents tonight are watching a cargo ship bound for the port of New York and New Jersey. The ship carrying some cargo from the Middle East was ordered back out to sea by the Coast Guard after sensors picked up unusual levels of radiation. A federal team is on its way with more sensitive equipment. As for law enforcement over the past year, the Justice Department insists its actions have been constitutional and have not violated individual rights. But federal judges are starting to say some steps go too far.
Tarek al-Basti, born in Egypt and now a U.S. citizen in Indiana, was arrested in mid-October when authorities discovered he took pilot lessons. He was held for 10 days and his lawyer couldn't find out why.
I've never been told that I cannot discuss certain facts with my client, particularly when it is based on those facts he is being held in jail.
Many legal experts say such cases show that in balancing civil liberties and increased security, the average American has not given much up.
What we have done for the most part is avoided that difficult choice and instead targeted immigrants and said we're willing to give up their rights, their liberties, for our security.
Most of the 750 immigrants picked up in the search for terrorists have now been released. Civil libertarians claim that shows the government rounded up the wrong people.
Allahu Akbar.
And Arab American groups say the government's decision to handle the immigration cases in secret makes immigrants less likely to report suspicious behavior.
They're fearful of how that information will be used or how they might be targeted.
Privacy advocates also question new rules that allow FBI agents to attend mosques and investigate whether suspects are checking out potential terror instruction books from public libraries. Civil libertarians say they're even more concerned about the government's decision to hold 2 Americans as enemy combatants without first having to prove the cases in any kind of court.
On that theory, anyone can be locked up. On that theory, I could be locked up, you could be locked up. It requires no showing of any actual culpability or even suspicion.
But in defending the government's actions, federal agents say September 11th put American law enforcement on a war footing, making it urgent to round up people who might have terror connections, while investigators sorted out who had actual ties to al-Qaeda. And the Attorney General insists that all those detained in the civilian system violated some rule or law. He says the aggressive detentions are necessary to stop a determined enemy that's willing to use suicide attacks.
Once you get into this context of people who are willing to die, prosecution isn't the answer. Prevention has to be the answer.
As for secret hearings, the government says small details that seem innocuous in any given case could add up to a mosaic of valuable information, giving a roadmap of the government's counter-terror tactics.
So far, the government has a mixed record in court on its terrorism strategy, with some of these cases almost certainly bound for the Supreme Court in its term that starts this fall. Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams tonight. That brings us to America's growing Arab and Muslim communities. For many, This has been the year, as one observer put it, that the American dream for them descended into nightmares. NBC's national correspondent is Jim Avila.
Weeks after the September 11th terrorist attack, Arab-American social service worker Aitad El-Shalabi heard a knock on her suburban Chicago door. It was the FBI.
Someone had phoned in a tip anonymously about that I'm raising a terrorist for Hamas.
The FBI was looking for a terrorist. Aitad is a widow and her son's in grammar school. When the boy they wanted to question was summoned, the agent's eyes widened. He was 8 years old.
Shock and amazed, and I said, "You didn't know?" They're like, "No, we thought he was older."
This is Janine Athman, an American of Palestinian descent, born 42 years ago in suburban Chicago. Now worried, everything she learned as an American about justice and civil rights collapsed along with New York's Twin Towers.
All of a sudden, this, the regular Constitution doesn't apply to Muslims somehow.
By evening September 11, many of this country's 1,200 mosques were suddenly targets of retaliation. Here, where Janine's family worships, riot police were called in to protect Muslims. Janine heard President Bush tell America the attackers were not true followers of Islam. And right away, she knew that peaceful American Muslims needed to reinforce that message by connecting to the mainstream. Leave the cocoon, as she calls it, practicing Islam in isolation, her children in Islamic school, and tell her non-Muslim neighbors of the innocence of her religion.
I felt like really that Islam was taken hostage and hijacked along with those planes.
Thank you for bringing us together again.
Janine found a receptive audience in a completely different culture, the Catholic Church in an adjacent suburb. 5 Muslim women meeting monthly with 5 Catholic women.
The first thing that they had said to us at dialogue was that the terrorists were not people that were following their Islamic faith.
Elaine Rand says she had no Muslim friends before 9/11. Now she has 5 and new wisdom.
Get to know a person always before judging them as a group. To know what the Islam religion is about and to accept Muslim people.
Lessons millions of innocent Muslims pray their fellow Americans learn before that next knock on the door. Jim Avila, NBC News, Chicago.
Now to the war front. Where are we a year later in the war on terror, and where is it going? We go to NBC's Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon, just a short distance away from where that plane did so much damage a year ago today. Jim?
And Tom, those terrorist attacks right here at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center not only changed America, but may have forever changed the way the U.S. military plans and fights a war. The war in Afghanistan has been about as unconventional as it gets. American troops armed with high technology charging into battle on horseback. It's the opening shot in America's war on terrorism, where every fight will be different from the last.
The next battlefield, wherever it happens to be, is not going to look like Afghanistan.
But where is the next battlefield? Sources tell NBC News the next likely target, al-Qaeda terrorists in Yemen. The USS Cole was attacked there 2 years ago, and it remains a hotbed for al-Qaeda today. It's where Osama bin Laden has had a network of safe houses used as central switchboards to pass along orders for a number of terrorist operations, including 9/11. NBC News has learned a small number of American special forces may already be in country. 800 more troops standing by in the region to help the Yemeni government go after al-Qaeda cells and terrorist camps. Other potential targets span the globe, from Somalia, a lawless haven for terrorists, to South America, where there's a growing threat from Islamic extremists in remote areas bordered by Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. Wherever the fight, American special forces will lead the way. It was Special Forces bodyguards who killed the would-be assassins of Afghan President Hamid Karzai last week.
We have the skills to do whatever needs to be done, wherever it needs to be done.
Even Iraq. NBC News has learned that American Special Forces have already been inside Iraq, scoping out potential airstrips for use in a possible U.S. invasion. American warplanes would pound Iraqi forces with high-precision bombs, but the decisive battles would likely be fought in the streets of Baghdad.
It's unlikely that Saddam Hussein is going to want to fight out in the desert again. He has seen what happened in Desert Storm.
That means special forces fighting street to street, door to door. An extremely high-risk operation where the enemy has the advantage.
You're really talking about an urban jungle. And just like guerrilla warfare in any other jungle, it allows the enemy to get in very, very close.
But before that, there's still unfinished business in Afghanistan, where American troops continue the search for Osama bin Laden. Jim Miklaszewski, NBC News, the Pentagon.
As you might expect, this country's airports were very quiet today. And joining me now with more on how the air travel system is faring, NBC's Robert Hager at Reagan National Airport in Washington. Robert?
Quiet is right, Tom. You can see from the empty ticket counter back there, 3,000 flights canceled in advance and the rest going out less than half full all across the nation. Compared to a normal Wednesday, it means almost 1 million people chose not to fly today. And with the system on edge, there were incidents. A Northwest Airlines flight from Memphis to Las Vegas diverted to Fort Smith, Arkansas, where 4 men were taken off for questioning. Turned out one had been shaving with a razor in the lavatory. An American flight from Houston to Dallas returned after takeoff because someone thought a passenger had a knife. It was really a comb. And a Russian cargo plane chartering U.S. troops and missile equipment from Europe to Fort Bliss, Texas, was ordered to land early because of an incorrect flight plan. And just look at the nearly deserted terminals today, from Los Angeles International to Chicago's O'Hare to Newark, New Jersey. Travelers wary of trouble today, but so far, nothing serious. It's been safe. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager tonight at Reagan National Airport in Washington. I'll be back with more of our special coverage, America Remembers. But first, a look at how the world remembered this day.
Beamer, Alan Bevan, Mark Bingham, Deora Bodley, Marion Britton, Thomas E. Burnett, Jr.
There are some rays of light in a day that otherwise was so somber and sad. Tonight, we revisit a woman whose story touched so many of you a year ago, a woman who lost her husband at Ground Zero, but after weeks of anguish, a moment of pure joy. NBC's Ann Thompson now with a family remembering and rebuilding.
To go forward, first Jackie Gavigan had to go back to Montauk.
Take your shoes off.
To their special place on Long Island. To the house her husband Donald, a bond trader at Cantor Fitzgerald, bought after the birth of their twins.
Hello, Jacqueline.
To where they spent their last week before September 11th.
I was always a strong person, and I know that's why my husband married me. So maybe I'm a little stronger now.
She never imagined then how strong she would have to be.
Here you go, Chubby.
Look up.
To give birth to their third child 6 weeks after Donald's death, with just his picture to show son Connor.
Daddy. This is Daddy. And I'm going to tell you all about Daddy. What a great guy he was.
To walk back into a hospital 6 months later, now head of the Donald Gavigan Jr. Fund. To see its first beneficiary, a 6-year-old boy from Kosovo, undergo the same kind of surgery that saved their eldest son's life.
Yeah, remember, look, he's got a boo-boo like you did.
To host a summer block party in their Brooklyn neighborhood, raising another $42,000 for Donald's fund. So September is no longer the cruelest month.
As each September approaches, I don't want to only have a vision of 2 falling towers. Instead, I want my children and I to focus on the child we will save in memory of their wonderful daddy, Donald Richard Gavigan Jr.
I used to hate microphones. I used to never be able to speak on those things.
So what changed you?
I have no idea. Maybe my husband's coming through with me. I don't know.
Run! Now both mom and dad to Lara, Donald III, and Connor, her most important job is raising their children.
I think it helps having children to stay focused and rebuild a life. Because my children deserve to be happy.
And there's one child in particular.
My blue-eyed baby.
When he was born, all
America remembers. Well, some stations will be leaving us now. For most of you, there is more of this special edition of NBC Nightly News right after this.
Pearl Harbor. This will be our Pearl Harbor.